Next month's Kaapi with Curiosity will also be
I don't think I need
displayed
that.
here.
It's okay.
So,
I can manage.
so basically, that's about Kaapi with Curiosity. So now I welcome Dr. B.R. Guruprasad, who's the director of Jawaharlal Nehru Planetarium, to officially welcome the gathering.
Thank you, Gayatri. Good afternoon to all of you. My name is Guru Prasad. I'm with Jawaharlal Nehru Planetarium here. Welcome to yet another lecture under the Kaapi with Curiosity series. And of course, as Gayatri told just now, this is a joint program with ICTS, International Center for Theoretical Sciences, and Jawaharlal Nehru Planetarium. All of you know, since we are sitting almost in the city center, we are at the city center and people can come very easily. It is very well connected. We have a lot of lectures, lot of programs, seminars, and many other programs, sky shows. Kindly do attend all our programs. Our website is there, okay? Taralaya, it is called. If you give it in Google, automatically it comes. Okay, you can kindly monitor our website, and all our programs are there, which are tuned towards the general public and students. So kindly do attend and encourage us. We do our level best for the general public and students, especially to inspire them and to entertain and provide information to the general public. And with this, very quickly, first of all, let me apologize for this delay. This is the compatibility issue. Anyway, that's what I was telling Professor Sandeep Saha, today's speaker. For this itself, we are struggling. Then how do those dragonflies navigate for 16,000 kilometers across the Indian Ocean? Where is Somalia? Once I have seen the map, where is Somalia? Where is the southern tip of India? Where is Maldives? Where is Seychelles? And where is Mozambique? Okay, quite far off places. So well and good. So I don't want to preempt anyway today's talk. It's not only exciting, really. Exciting is an understatement, I would say. Infinite journeys on the finite wings, a dragonfly's epic marathon across the Indian Ocean. See, this lecture, as the speaker, I don't want to preempt, but anyway, one or two sentences I will tell you. It is a seamless confluence of so many things, whether it is ecology, biology, as well as navigation, okay, at the planetary scale itself, okay. So I'm sure that it would be exciting, and today we are very fortunate. I have met Professor Saha, Sandeep Saha, only about 30 minutes back. I feel I know him for a long time. That's what I feel. We chatted so nicely, okay, as though we know each other for a long time. Very affable person. Thank you, sir. Thank you coming. Thank you for coming here and delivering a talk under the KWK. Okay, Professor Sandeep Saha is an associate professor of aerospace engineering at IIT Kharagpur, of course. He got his PhD from Imperial College London and a background spanning CNRS, France, and industrial leadership at General Electric also, and Schlumberger at UK. His specialty is he bridges the gap between the fundamental fluid mechanics and real world engineering, science and engineering, both. That's a very challenging thing indeed. His expertise ranges from industrial aerodynamics to his current focus on low Reynolds number flows. Okay, all these things, once upon a time when I studied fluid mechanics, I read all these things, especially Reynolds number. Today, Dr. Saha explores the frontiers of flight, from decoding the miraculous migrations of insects to designing extraterrestrial vehicles, very exciting, and optimizing respiratory health. Oh, two different domains. Proving that the principle of fluid mechanics govern both the natural and the engineering world. So with this, I welcome you all and welcome Professor Saha for this. And sir, the stage is yours. Please.
Thank you.
And before the talk, on behalf of ICTS, I would like to hand over this small memento to Professor Saha.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Please.
Thank you. So it's an extraordinary moment for me. This is my first public talk. And what is even more exciting is that some of the students who worked with me on this topic are actually there in the audience. So we'll get to meet them after a while. After the talk, I'll introduce you. But I think the excitement comes from the fact that something so small, which is 5 centimeters in length, is going across the globe. I mean, on the scale of the globe, this is the scale of the globe, and you have something which is about 5 centimeters long, which is going across the Indian Ocean and coming back. So that's something very exciting. So I'll not spend much more time. I think first I have to thank all those who made it possible. So Sanat, I don't see him in the audience, but Amit Rajashik is there in the audience. My colleague Professor Arnab Roy, he has co-supervised Sanat and made many of the experiments possible. Funding body, SERB, now they have become ANRF, and IIT Kharagpur, of course. So these people have made it possible. So I'd like to introduce you. First, I want to introduce 3 champions. Okay, the first champion I want to introduce you to is called the bar-tailed godwit. It's a very tiny bird, but it travels far. Okay, so that's what it looks like. Okay, so it travels far. Another champion in a very similar league is the Arctic tern. That's what it looks like. So very aerodynamic, very fascinating. Okay, and of course we have the dragonfly. It's called the Globe Skimmer. That's what it looks like. I think many of you might be able to relate to it. It might be there in your backyard. Oftentimes in the months of September, October, November, you might see it in your backyard. Very bright yellow. Okay, so this person, I took this picture in Kharagpur, but it could be for anywhere. So the first thing I want to sort of do is have a quick vote. Okay, quick vote just to get you guys thinking about, who do you think of these animals migrates the farthest? The first one, the bar-tailed godwit, the Arctic tern, the globe skimmer, or all of them? So can we have a raise of hands for option A? Option A. Okay, 1 person. Okay. What about the second one? Everybody, yeah, okay. Almost everybody thinks it's the Arctic tern. How many people think it's the globe skimmer? Okay, people who have worked on it, I think. So, yeah. Okay, so the answer is all of the above. So all of you are correct. All of you are correct, but it's a bit confusing. How can all of you be correct? I mean, surely only one of them has to be the correct answer, right? So that's confusing, right? So the real reason is the question was not well posed. I did not ask a very specific question. I did not say, how do you want to measure how far you're going? I mean, of course, it's measured in distances, but is it in one go? Or it could be in an annual cycle, or, we are comparing birds and insects, which is not a fair comparison. I mean, if you take a 747 and a small aircraft, a 747 can surely go a lot further than a small aircraft. So it's not a fair comparison to compare 747 with a small aircraft, right? So the bar-tailed godwit, in one go, it can go up to, it's not visible, okay, 13,560 kilometers. That's from Alaska to Tasmania. Okay, non-stop 11 days. But that's one go. What if you say, well, how far can you go in one cycle? Like you go and you come back. Okay, so that's the one which the Arctic tern wins. Okay, that's 50 to 70,000 kilometers. So it goes from the North Pole to the South Pole and comes back. Okay, I'll show you more about this. Okay, but that's that's like comparing the jumbo jet to a small aircraft. So we should do something about the comparison. So one way to compare would be compare the size. Okay, so if you're in an insect, you're very small, like 5 centimeters is the length scale of the globe skimmer, and the Arctic tern is about 35 centimeters. So we can divide the distance which they are covering by their size, which is somewhat like analogous to the fuel they will be sort of having. So if you divide that, then what we see is that the bar-tailed godwit is only going 75 million times its body length. The Arctic tern is going 200 million, whereas the dragonfly is going 360 million times its body length. Now these numbers, they are very large, but if you think in terms of rupees, for instance, if you had these many rupees, then I think you'll start to get a sense of, the order of magnitude. Whereas if you compare that to a human marathon, it's only 23,000. That's peanuts compared to 360 million. Okay? So what the dragonfly is achieving is immense, and we can only appreciate it when you put it into the right context. Okay? All right? So that's why I said that all of you got the right answer, but it's an unusual question, right? An ill-formed question. So here on the map you can see different great migrations. So you've got different kinds of animals. So you've got things which can swim, animals which swim and go far. Then you've got animals which fly, and they are the ones who go the farthest. Okay, you can see the bar-tailed godwit and the Arctic tern in numbers 5 and 6, and the Globe Skimmer is on number 9. Okay, so if you look at the bar-tailed godwit, that's the one it's covering. Okay, 30,000 kilometers, and it starts from Alaska, goes all the way to New Zealand, Tasmania, and then comes back towards North Korea, China, and then heads back to Alaska. So that's 50 to 70,000 kilometers of round trip. Sorry, this one is 30,000 kilometers. This is the actual tracking data. Okay, so you can see from Alaska to Tasmania, 13,560 kilometers. So this is in the Guinness Book of World Records. So not just humans, but birds also can make it to the Guinness Book of World Records. Okay, 11 days non-stop. Okay. The next one's the Arctic tern. That's what it looks like. So 50 to 70,000 kilometers. So you can see that it's going. So that one, this is number 5. Okay, and if you see the satellite data for this, it looks something like this. So you can see it's going all the way from one pole to the other. So the round trip is 50 to 70,000 kilometers. The nice thing about this bird is that it can land on water, so it doesn't have to go non-stop. So the challenges are much reduced. Okay, so it's not like the bar-tailed godwit, which needs to go from land to land. Okay, so that's the difference. So that's why it can cover a lot greater distance over a period of time. Okay, but now if you look at the dragonfly, it's about 14 to 18,000 kilometers, but there's no satellite data. The reason we don't have satellite data is because these are so tiny. You can't put a tracker on them. If you can't put a tracker on them, there is no way you can look at the migration in real time, which you can for other animals. Okay, so in that sense, it becomes a harder problem to look at. Okay, so another way to look at it is if you compare with other insects which are migrating. Okay, so here you can see the dragonfly. Now, the other interesting thing is that when you're looking at insects don't have a very long lifespan, so a few months really. So the dragonfly does this entire distance in 4 generations. So if the current generation goes, then the grandchildren's children come back to India. Okay. There's another one which is called the painted lady, and the painted lady, that's what it looks like. It goes from Scandinavia to sub-Saharan region, and that's about 15,000 kilometers, 6 generations. Okay. And the last one is very famous. It's called the monarch butterfly. Monarch butterfly, it moves from Mexico to Canada and comes back. That's about 5 to 9,000 kilometers in 4 generations. Okay. So now that puts us into the right context that we are comparing insects to insects, and you can still see that our globe skimmer comes out as the champion. The other interesting fact is that most of these migrations are north and south, north to south, north to south, which means it gets colder, they come towards warmer places, and then they go back when it's more favorable. But our dragonfly is different. It's going a lot of north-south is there, but there's also an east-west component to it. So it's slightly different. Okay. So what's going on? The other thing is that they prefer, both these insects, the other two, they prefer moving around on the land with very small sort of overseas components. Whereas this one, the Globe Skimmer, has large components over the ocean. So it's something very different, okay, from other insects. There are other things, these question marks, I will come back at the end, okay. They are transatlantic migrations. So just to give you context of what these numbers mean, so if you go from Bangalore to London, that's 8,000 kilometers. If you go from Bangalore to San Francisco, which is probably one of the longest flights on Earth, is about 14,000 kilometers. So you can imagine these insects are doing something on that order. Okay. So next time you're flying to San Francisco, you can think about the dragonfly, which is doing that. Okay. The Earth's diameter at the equator is 12,000 kilometers. Okay, we'll talk about those question marks later at the end. But what comes to our mind immediately is that, these dragonflies on this immense journey, where do they get to eat from? Then there might be storms on the way. Then there might be endurance limits. I mean, how long can you keep flying? Okay? They might not find any land, where to land, etc. They can actually land on ships, etc. if they find any, but that's like leaving it to chance, So these questions, they make you wonder, how is it even possible? Do we have any evidence for these kinds of migrations? Right? So what's the evidence? So what I've done is I've taken this blog and I've marked out some things. I've highlighted a few things. So if you read the highlighted parts, let me read it out to you. A group of us were at the Kovalam Creek surveying the coast when a swarm of several thousand wandering gliders, that's the other name of globe skimmers, Pantala flavescens, enveloped us. So they're coming and enveloping them. This cloud of odonates had moved in from the sea. So they're coming from the sea. Okay? We could see the swarm extend far over the waves. The insect gradually moved inland to the tail of the groin and further. After some time, another wave of insects came. So, they're coming wave after wave after wave. And then another. These dragonflies allowed the winds to carry them, forming a river of odonates. So they're forming kind of rivers. They're coming with the wind and they're flowing through as if it's a river. So the same, I'll show you a video, but before that, I want you to appreciate these little pictures, I took this from this blog. So that's what the swarm looks like, okay? And this is a male dragonfly, and this is a female dragonfly, which is laying eggs in freshwater pool. So they actually lay their eggs in freshwater pools. Okay, these are temporary pools. So the same experience is we'll see that in a video here, taken by my student Sanat in Cherrapunji on the 2nd of November 2019. So you'll see the same thing. So you can imagine it's the river of odonates which they're talking about. Okay, the same experience. So that's how they move. Okay. So we have some evidence. Okay. So let me tell you a few things about our champion. Our champion that's what it looks like. Wingspan is about 8 centimeters, and you can find it almost any continent apart from Antarctica. The length of the body is 5 centimeters. And the weight's 0.3 grams, so very light, which is why we can't have trackers for them. The question is that why bother studying them? So the first thing, as an engineer, which got my attention, is that we can't make anything which is so tiny and go so far. So for me, as an engineer, it was a great source of motivation. Okay, we can make micro-aerial vehicles, which of course we don't have the sophistication yet, but we can try to make these kinds of flying vehicles. Also for ecological reasons. So in this little map, you can see there are different colors over here, and these colors, they represent biodiversity hotspots. So essentially, there are a lot of different organisms, different kinds of species. So very sort of biologically very hotspots, something's happening, too many species are there, okay? So you can see that these dragonflies are connecting many of these biodiversity hotspots. This is the migration route, and they're connecting many of these. So you can imagine there's a huge amount of biomass. All these dragonflies, the swarms of dragonflies, they're going from one continent to the other, and on their way, they are stopping at these biological hotspots. Okay? And you can imagine that they are maintaining the local ecological balance because they lay eggs in water. The nymph, it feeds on mosquito larvae or other fish or tadpoles, etc. So they are eating other things. So the predators, the pests, etc., they can eat on them. So even before they emerge, they are consuming them inside the water. So you never face these problems. So you can imagine that if the dragonfly population goes down, then malarial outbreaks can become common. Okay, so even before the balance is disturbed, we should be aware of such things happening. Okay, so for ecological reasons, the last and very important reason is that the biology is very well not understood. I mean, we don't know how they navigate. We don't understand many aspects of this migration. So there are fundamental reasons, for biological reasons, we should be studying them. Okay, so for many reasons, this is a very important problem for us to study. Now, what we know from previous work is that, so Charles Anderson in 2009, he's a marine biologist who lives in Maldives. He proposed this route. Okay, this is just a proposal, hypothesis kind of thing. And you can see that these dragonflies, they start off from India and they head towards Maldives in the month of October. So their population starts to peak in Maldives in October. Then later on in Seychelles in November, December, their numbers start to peak again. So it's a wave which is moving, okay? And then gradually in the month of December, you'd find them in Mozambique. Later on, they move northwards. Next generation in Uganda, Lake Victoria, and then to Somalia, and then finally the fourth generation comes back to India. So that's sort of the circle, okay? That's 14 to 18,000 kilometers. So you might ask, why do they migrate? I mean, that's a huge distance, right? And it's daunting to fly over the Indian Ocean. I mean, nowhere you can see land, and they can see, right? I mean, if they can see, then they can perceive what's the ocean looking like, and they would be sort of scared. So it's a sort of, how do they have such audacity to take such a migration? So what we know is that in the month of November, this is the map of the total precipitable. So you can imagine how much moisture is there in the atmosphere. So you can see that in Africa, you have a lot of moisture. So the blue means there's a lot more moisture. Okay, and India is pretty dry. It's all black. Okay, so there's not much rain happening in India in the month of November. And if you go towards Africa, then you find there's a lot of precipitation. Now, if there's precipitation, there's going to be freshwater pools. And then if you remember that picture of the dragonfly laying eggs in freshwater pools, then you can imagine that they can breed and then they can lay their eggs in these freshwater pools. So there is good reason why they would want to go from India to Africa. And you can see the winds are also blowing towards Africa. So you have assistance from nature, and you have also a biological driver which is there for them to go there and lay eggs. Okay? So this is typically at the altitude of 1,000 meters that they migrate, and they get assistance from the winds. Whereas in the month of June, you see India is getting a lot more rain, and Africa is relatively dry. So there's reason for them to come back to India. Okay? So that's what is driving the migration. Okay? So that's the reason why they would be migrating from Africa to India in the month of May, June. So on the way back, they get strong support from what is known as the Somali Jet. You see the strong winds, that's the Somali Jet. They get strong support from Somali Jet, and they can cover that entire distance, so they don't have any stopovers. They covered the distance directly, 3,000 kilometers in 2 days or so, okay? So we wanted to understand what's going on. So we asked this question: how do they achieve this miraculous feat? So we break down into three parts. Okay. The first part is how long can they keep flapping their wings and go as far as they can go without any support from the winds? So they have limited energy reserves. If there were no winds, how far could they go? Okay. That's the first question which we ask. The next question we ask, but what we find from our sort of calculations is that they can keep flapping for 90 hours. And in that 90 hours, they wouldn't be able to make it across the Indian Ocean. Okay? So the wind assistance is imperative if they are going to make it across the ocean. Okay? So next question we try to answer is, how does wind assist in this migration? So, and the last part is, well, even if you get the support from wind, the wind is not blowing towards Maldives, towards Seychelles. So within the winds, you have to navigate to reach your destination. Okay. So the last part is about, how do they navigate and try to reach where their destination is. Okay. So these are the questions which we try and answer. So typically when a dragonfly is migrating or moving, then they flap, then they glide. Flap, glide, flap, glide. So there's some flapping, some gliding. So that's efficient because you flap for a while and then you conserve energy just by gliding. So you can enhance the distance, how far you're going, but you don't have to expend that much energy. Okay. So typically when you start working on a research problem, you look at the literature. But there wasn't much literature, unfortunately, because nobody was working on this problem really. So we fall back on other things which are there. And these are the kind of challenges which exist when you're studying this problem. There's bird migration theory, but birds are typically much faster and they rely much less on wind assistance. So that couldn't be used directly. But of course, we learned something from bird migration theory about the energetics and we try and apply it here. There are other kinds of studies, which is there are field studies. So people go out in the field and they're studying dragonflies, how they're moving, how they're compensating for the wind, etc. But that's also, and even radar studies. So with the radar, you can study, which direction they're moving. But that's only at limited spots. You cannot get a global picture, the kind of picture I was showing in the very beginning. So there are other kinds of studies like observation studies. So at a location, you just monitor their population. So even then you get some sort of picture that in this region the population increases, decreases, then you know the seasonality of these migrations. There's also isotope analysis. I won't go into the details, but it's a way to find out where these dragonflies originated from. Okay, you can get that sort of information. And finally, you have some sort of theoretical approach where you just assume that they are riding the winds. So if the wind's flowing like this, then they're just being carried passively by the wind. If you just have an incense stick, then the smoke keeps rising. Okay? So that's sort of an approach. Okay? But the problem with that is that you're left at the mercy of wind. So if the wind is taking you not towards Maldives, there's no way to arrive at Maldives. So that's a problem with this approach. Okay? So you cannot completely sort of rely on the winds. You have to navigate. Okay? So because we are from the aerospace engineering, we can sort of bring some ideas of aerospace engineering into this problem. So we are using engineering tools to solve a biology problem, which is unique. Okay. So what kind of analogy do we find? The first is like, if you have a jet, then the jet can carry sort of finite amount of fuel. And with that finite amount of fuel, it can only go so far. And that's the same thing for the dragonfly. Okay, so the dragonfly can only go so far. So if you could do these calculations, it's called the energetics calculations, then you can sort of find out how far the range of the dragonfly is. The next is that, lighter aircraft especially, they struggle with the wind. You might have seen crosswind landings, etc. So aircrafts do generally also sort of struggle. You might have faced turbulence, etc. So, wind does have a strong influence. So when you're planning your route from here to there or somewhere, then you would like to take assistance of tailwinds. Okay, that's usually advantageous. So there are certain algorithms for doing that, and that's a path planning algorithm. So you can see there is an analogy between aerospace engineering and what the dragonfly is trying to achieve. So we try to apply this, and so although the literature looked like a jigsaw puzzle, we've got some sort of original contribution towards that. So we did these calculations. So you can imagine the analogy between the dragonfly and a Boeing 737. So there are certain forces acting on it. So the aircraft's weight is pointing downwards. The wings are there to generate lift, but then you have the aerodynamic drag, which is acting to prevent you from moving forward. That's the drag, and of course, to overcome that, you have the thrust. Okay, so if you knew all these things, then you could calculate the drag which is there acting on the aircraft, and then the power which will be required by the aircraft to overcome that drag, and then you could sort of calculate what's the rate at which you'll be consuming the fuel. Okay, so if you knew what's the rate at which you're consuming the fuel, and you also knew how big your fuel tank is, you can sort of estimate what's the range going to be. Okay? So that's the idea. All right. So we do these calculations, and we can find, so the power consumption is a function of the velocity, so we get this kind of graph. You can ignore the graph, we get some numbers. So these numbers, they're telling us something interesting. First is that if they want to maximize the range they are migrating to, that's about 4.5 meters per second. So we have some idea about what's the velocity at which they would be migrating. So if we could track them someday, then we could sort of compare this velocity to what is actually observed in the experiments. Okay. The other thing is they can fly up to 90 hours, and in these 90 hours they can go up to 1400 kilometers. Now 1400 kilometers is clearly not enough to migrate across the Indian Ocean. Okay. So they can't cross the Indian Ocean, but these numbers, they actually are close to what other people have found. So 120 hours, 96 hours is what other people have proposed. So these numbers are about in the same sort of ballpark figure. Okay. So that's what we learned from the energetics calculation. So that the dragonfly cannot make it across, but we get this number 90 hours, which is pretty useful. I mean, either way, it cannot migrate for something which is more than 90 hours. Okay, that's a constraint which we get to learn. So the next thing is that we need to account for the wind. Okay, now if you think of the wind, the first case, the wind is completely tailwind, like the wind is coming from this direction, and the dragonfly is also moving in that direction. So if the vectors are in the same direction, then you get the sum of these two, like the the vector sum and the scalar sum as well. They are the same. So that's the maximum. Okay. So the green is the wind velocity, the orange is the dragonfly velocity, and if you add these two, then you get the resultant. Okay. Now, if you misalign yourself slightly, so the wind is in this direction and you go in slightly this direction, that's the second case, that's partial crosswind, and you can see that the resultant in that case is a little bit less than the first case. Okay, and then if the misalignment increases, then the vector sum is reduced even further. So you can imagine how the dragonfly is trying to take advantage of the wind condition. So if you go along with the wind, you can go further, but if you misalign yourself, then your velocity is going to reduce, but it's still more than your velocity. So you can enhance the distance you're going by the help of wind. Okay, so that's very critical. Okay, so you can see how the tailwind is actually helping you migrate a lot further. Okay. So we did some experiments. This is a wind tunnel. Some of you might have seen, some who don't know. This is what a wind tunnel looks like. So there's the entrance, the air goes in from here. You can see honeycomb-like thing. It straightens out the flow, and then it goes into the test section. That test section looks like this. That's a close-up view of the test section. And there's a fan at the end which is sort of sucking in the air. Okay. So we do these experiments in a wind tunnel, and in a wind tunnel you can imagine that if you release smoke, then this goes, it flows with the wind. Okay. So we want to compare the active wind compensated flight of the dragonflies with just if you're let at the mercy of wind. Okay. So if you just assume that it's being sort of carried as a smoke particle, the dragonfly, then how far does it go? Where does it go? We want to compare these two cases. Okay. Are you getting the point? Yeah. So if I show you the video, then it looks something like this. So initially we haven't turned the propeller on, and then when you see the propellers turned on, it's pushing the air the other direction. So you can see that the smoke particles are going with the wind. Okay. So that's what. So if we assume that the dragonfly moves with the wind, you can also think of, if you inject dye in water, then the dye will also sort of, move with the water molecules. Okay. So you can imagine that the dragonfly is just being passively convected by the wind. Okay. So we did all these calculations, and this is the sort of routes we found between the different places it's going to. Okay. Now the interesting thing is that we know that the dragonfly is taking advantage of the wind. Okay. So if you take advantage of the wind, then you can find the fastest route between two locations. Okay. If you find the fastest route between two locations, then we can work out these routes. Okay, that's the route, what it looks like. So if you compare a passive tracer, the smoke particle, with the active sort of, actively looking for the fastest route, then the red line is the fastest route, and the yellow line is if you're left at the mercy of wind. Okay, so when the dragonfly is coming from Somalia to India in the month of June, it can cover 2,800 kilometers in 45 hours. Okay, so this is the longest leg of the journey, which takes the least time because the winds are very strong. Even in that first picture when I was showing you the moisture content, there were strong winds. This is the same. Okay, this is the Somali Jet. And you get very strong assistance from the wind, and you can cover 3,000 kilometers almost in 2 days. Okay, so I want you to remember this number in your mind. Okay, now if you go from India to Maldives a little bit later in the year, so that's in the month of October, what you find is that if you go with the wind, that's the yellow line. Okay, if you go with the yellow line, then of course you're traveling just with the wind locally, right? You end up in the middle of the ocean and you're probably dead. Okay? So there's no point in going with the wind. Okay? You have to know where your destination is. So the red line is if you know where Maldives is, then you are searching for stronger winds, and somewhere you find stronger winds and you go towards Maldives. Okay. Now the interesting thing is that in this case, it's going only about 1,000 kilometers in the same amount of time. So the distance has reduced to a third, but the time is the same. So you can imagine how strong the influence of wind is in this case. Okay, so that's why the wind's role is very, very important. Okay, now if you move to the next case, so if you move from Maldives to Seychelles, these are all amazing places. The dragonflies really have a lot of fun wherever they go. What we find here is that the dragonfly, if it keeps going with the wind, that's the yellow line, you die. But if you go with the wind to a certain extent, and then if you know where to break off from it, and you go in the direction of Seychelles, and finally when the winds are much weaker, you go towards Seychelles, that's when it's using its own power, then you've covered a great amount of distance with the help of wind, and what's left is what you're covering with your own energy. Okay, and this is the hardest part of the journey because this is 2,500 kilometers in 90 hours. So this is just on the edge. Okay, so in this case, this is the hardest part of the journey. Again, in this case, this is even more obvious that you have some winds, but if you don't catch the winds locally, because locally it didn't find the strong winds, if you just go with the wind, then you're here. You don't go very far. But if you're actively looking for the strong winds, which is the red line, then you can enhance the distance significantly. Okay, and then in this case, you cover 2,000 kilometers in 81 hours. So you've got 10 hours more sort of to go, 9 hours. Okay, so that's the difference which wind is making. Okay, so you can imagine that wind is a very important factor in this migration. Okay, so this was a lot of theory. This is all theoretical calculations. You might ask, how can we believe this? So it's a good reason to go back and check what we did. So the reason why the dragonfly is moving or migrating is because there's rain at the destination. It's raining at the destination. That's the biological driver. But you also need assistance from the wind. So only when you have both the factors, that's when it can migrate. Okay, migration is only possible when the two factors are there. So what we've plotted here, the green bars is the precipitation at the destination, which is in this case India. Okay, and in India we know that May, June, July it starts to rain. Okay, now the blue lines what you see is from our calculations. So we run our calculations year after year after year, and we see how many successful trajectories. By successful trajectories, I mean how many times can you come from Somalia to India in less than 90 hours. Okay, and that's the blue bar. Okay, and we do these calculations for different months. So a higher blue bar means you have stronger wind assistance in that month. Okay, now of course you can see that it's favorable to come to India in the month of May, June, July. So that's when you see them arriving in India. Okay, now if you want to go from India to Maldives, then you see that September, October, November is a good time to go. So we are getting sort of a picture emerging. We are getting a migration window. And it's feasible to migrate in that window. Okay? So next, if you go from Maldives to Seychelles, then November, December, January, February, that's when it's becoming feasible. It's the migration window. And then finally, if you go from Seychelles to Mozambique, then early part of the year, January, February, March, of course, December onwards, it starts to become favorable. So you can imagine, so there's an overlap between these. So you can choose, you can stay there, you can lay eggs, the next, the progeny might emerge and then they might go. So there are options, okay? So it's many things are possible because of this, okay? So now we have the migration window and we can go back and compare to whatever people have reported in the literature as a comparison and check whether the migration window, which is being predicted by our calculations, is matching with what we see in the literature, okay? So in this table, please don't get overwhelmed, I'll explain what's going on, but you can find papers from 1913, 1924, 1931. So papers which are spanning over 100 years. So people have been reporting for over 100 years, okay? And what you find here is that if you're arriving in Maldives, then October, November, December is a good time to arrive. That's the top right, okay? And our model is also predicting the same. Seychelles, November, December, March, November to April, and we find that January to March is a good time. Same thing if you in South Africa, Tanganyika, Uganda, Malawi, then December, early part of the year, late part of the year, December to March, that's matching with, So it's not just a coincidence that the dragonfly is trying to minimize the time. I mean, that was the hypothesis, that the dragonfly is trying to find the fastest route between the two locations. So our hypothesis was that the dragonfly is trying to look for this fastest route. And maybe what it's actually doing is that it's taking a near optimal. So it's not the fastest, but something close to the fastest route is what the dragonfly is using. And that's why we can see that these two are matching, okay? So what really starts to emerge is if we start from Cherrapunji, where we found the dragonflies migrating, they can move towards the south and they can arrive in Kerala, in Tamil Nadu, in Sri Lanka, and there is extensive sort of literature which points that they arrive in the months of October, November, September, October in the south of India, and that's with the retreating monsoons. Okay, so there's good evidence to that. So this is tying in very well with what we know from the literature. So this is sort of giving us more confidence. So what we can imagine is that there's the fastest route, and around that there's a band of other routes which are possible, and they all go and converge onto, say, Maldives, Seychelles, because these are sort of locations which you cannot avoid because they are stopovers. They're mandatory stopovers. Okay, so the band sort of expands and then converges on Maldives, then Seychelles, and within that band, that flyway, highway, whatever you will call it, just like we drive on highways, there's a window. Okay, that window is, that's when you get to go. So population might diverge, some parts go in this direction, some parts go in that direction, and they all converge in Maldives at different times of the sort of window. Okay, so a lot of complexity can actually exist. So it's a more complex, so it was not just a simple line which I was showing in the first picture. You can have a network, a branched network which exists. Okay, so that's sort of more close to the reality. The last part I want to focus on, how the dragonfly is compensating for wind drift. I mean, remember I was telling that the wind is not exactly in the direction which the dragonfly wants to go. So if you look at this picture, the dragonfly wants to go along the yellow line, ideally. That's called the preferred inherited direction. So it knows that I want to go to Seychelles, for instance. I mean, I don't know how it knows, but I think it knows, okay? But the wind's stronger in the west direction, so it goes with the wind to some extent. So in the first part, in the A part of the journey, the angle is 0 degrees, then it breaks away, and in the B part, the angle is 7.5 degrees, and then In the last part, where the winds are very weak, it's going at a very large angle, which is 45 degrees. And each time the dragonfly is drifting away from that yellow line, it also needs to remember that actually I want to go into the direction of Maldives. So a lot of complex calculations are happening in the mind of the dragonfly. I don't know how it does that, but it does. Okay, I don't know if it even calculates. It just knows, hardwired in its brain. Anyway, so we did some experiments in our wind tunnel. So remember I told you about the wind tunnel, that we can regulate the flow of air in a wind tunnel. We did experiments on the dragonfly in the wind tunnel, and what we found is that this is what our setup looks like. It's a bit sort of messy, but that's what things look like in labs. The dragonfly is not constantly flapping. Okay, it flaps for a while. That's the burst, the red region, and then it just stays like this. But it can move its wings and can generate forces. Okay. So this is the last graph which I'm going to sort of explain. So no more complicated things. Okay, but this is important. So what we do is we keep the dragonfly in a tailwind configuration. So the wind's coming from the back and the wind's going past the dragonfly, and we change the angle. So the misalignment I was talking about. So we misalign the dragonfly intentionally by small amounts and see how the dragonfly responds. Okay. So what we find is that if it's perfectly aligned with the tailwind, so that's 180 degrees. So that's just perfect tailwind, and we measure the side force. So it's drifting and it's trying to correct with the side force. Okay, so the side force has been divided by the weight. It just makes it a easier thing to, instead of grams, milligrams, something that's complicated, we just divide by the weight, which is the relevant figure. Okay, so we find that it's very close to zero, the side forces. Okay, thereafter, if you increase the misalignment to 5 degrees, it can generate a lot of side force because it can go in this direction. Okay, so it can generate large side force, but as you keep increasing, it gets harder and harder for the dragonfly. So it increases and then starts to decrease because it's getting harder and harder for the dragonfly to compensate. And at some point, when the angle is too large, it just is not able to compensate. So you get negative side forces because it's no longer possible for the dragonfly to compensate for the wind. Okay. Now, the other interesting thing is that if you see the wind's coming like this, and it's going to push the dragonfly in this direction. So the corrective force has to be in this direction. That's the positive side force. So here there are two symbols. The star is when it was passively gliding, and the circle is when it was flapping. Okay. So when it's flapping, it's intentionally creating some positive side force every time. You see, all the circles are above the star, which means that it is trying to correct for the drift. So by flapping, it is intentionally correcting for the drift. Okay, so this is what we learned from our experiments. They are capable of correcting for the drift. So now, if you think that it is modifying its flapping in some complicated way, now every 5 degrees is going to be very hard to distinguish. Okay, so what I'll show you is the difference between the manner it flaps. It's called the kinematics of its flapping. So how it flaps in headwind. Headwind is when the wind is coming from your face, and tailwind is when it is coming from the back. Okay, so I'll show you the difference in the kinematics of headwind and tailwind. So this is headwind, and you'll see a lot of large amplitude flapping. Okay, so a lot of large amplitude flapping. I'll play it once again. That's typically what you would imagine a dragonfly does. Now the tailwind looks completely different. It is very obvious that it is riding the winds. Okay, you see that? I'll show it once again. So I think it looks a bit like rowing. I don't know how many people go row, but it looks a bit like rowing to me. So we wanted to understand, the kind of velocity field it is generating. I mean, it's generating some flow around it, right? So we set up some experiments to see how the flow field near the dragonfly looks like. And for the first time, you'll see how the flow field around the dragonfly looks like. You can see these vortices which are being generated by the dragonfly. And it's pushing all the air downwards. It's trying to escape. Okay? So you can see most of the air is being pushed downwards and it is sort of trying to escape. Okay? So by pushing the air, it is going to generate a force in the other direction. It's trying to escape. Now, I was talking about kinematics, how it's flapping its wings. It's got a pair of wings, a hind wing and a forewing. Okay? Forewing is the front one and the hind wing is the back one. Now, if you've got a pair of wings, you can either do this or you can do this. I mean, these are the two extremes, right? So we find both these mechanisms. So when it's flapping both of them in sync, that's when it's trying to generate a lot of force to run away. Okay? That's the escape flight mode. It's trying to escape. And the other one is when there's large phase difference between the two wings, and that's the normal flight mode. So in the normal flight mode, you will see it's very smart. I mean, some of the momentum is going this way and some of it is going this way. So it's trying to propel itself forward while it is staying afloat. Okay? So that's very interesting. So it's got, a lot of capability. So I'll show you both. Okay? First, I'll start with the escape flight mode. So in the escape flight mode, you can see most of the air is being pushed downwards. And in the case of normal flight mode, so some is going downwards and some of it is going backwards. More so than that case. So it's propelling itself forward and it is trying to fly. Okay. So we did numerical simulations of this creature and you can see this is the gliding and the two wings are almost sort of aligned. So the guy who did the simulations there in the audience. So we did these simulations to understand what's going on. And in this case, you can see there's a slight misalignment with the two, the forewing and the hind wing. And what you can see is that the flow of vortices is very wide. I mean, this is called the wake. The wake is very wide, okay? And the wider the wake, the higher is the friction or the drag, okay? So you can see the friction is higher in this case. This is the drag coefficient. If you make them completely aligned, then the size of the wake is reduced and the drag goes down. This is the drag coefficient. The drag goes down because the size of the wake is reduced. Okay? And then if you put the hind wing below the forewing, then again the size of the wake increases and the drag goes up. So for efficient gliding, you want to have them perfectly aligned, which is what we saw in the picture. Okay? So we are able to do these kinds of simulations to understand what the dragonfly is trying to do. Because all of these things are important for the migration. Remember I told you that the dragonfly flaps and glides. So we've been studying flapping and gliding. Okay? So we can do these kinds of simulations and the flow field looks pretty complicated. This is just gliding flight. So as you increase the angle of attack, by angle of attack I mean the wing is something like this. So for a small angle of attack, then this is a little bit higher angle of attack, this is even higher angle of attack. So as we increase the angle of attack from 3 degrees to 5 degrees to 8 degrees, the flow field changes and becomes so much more complicated. So we are able to study all of these things now. Now of course, when the dragonfly is flying, it's just like us. I mean, there's turbulence, okay? So we need to study how the dragonfly is flying through turbulence and how the wing structure is a lot more complicated than that of an aircraft, and how that interacts with the turbulence. And and we can study how the interaction happens with turbulence. We are trying to understand what's going on, and these are all the exciting things about research, you know, that you get to learn from the nature. Okay. So I've told you everything I wanted to tell you about dragonflies, and it has enabled our view of, you know, how they are flying, they're going across such large distances. But it has also had an impact. And I want to talk to you about the impact it has had. Now it has enabled us to go on to study other things. So remember, in the migration path, I was talking about some transatlantic migrations. So now we are trying to understand the transatlantic migrations which have been reported in the literature. So this is the first case. This is of the painted lady butterfly. So the painted lady butterfly, remember, it was going from Scandinavia to sub-Sahara and coming back. That has been reported once to go from West Africa to French Guiana. So West Africa is just the edge, the western edge of Sahara, and that has sort of one of these painted ladies, they have sort of ended up in French Guiana, which is sort of, you know, Venezuela is where, I think now people know where Venezuela is. Okay, so it's close to Venezuela, so it's in South America. Okay, and you can see this is the article. A transoceanic flight of over 4,200 kilometers. This is more than the painted the Globe Skimmers. 4,200 kilometers by painted lady butterflies. Okay, so this paper they talk. So this is West Africa, and this is French Guiana, and this is 4,200 kilometers. So we can study these kinds of problems now. It has enabled us to go on to investigate these kinds of problems. Okay, so we are no longer sort of limited to what happens in our vicinity. We can go on to study other migration patterns around the world. Okay. There's also another interesting story of these guys. These are desert locusts, and they are nasty. They come and they devour vegetation like anything. Okay, and they are there. They have been plagues. Desert locust plagues have happened in India too. It's a food security issue. And one of them they flew from West Africa to all the way to Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Caribbean islands. Okay, this was back in 1988. They migrated, and the first paper on this stuff came out around 2006, 2009. People have studied, so we can go on to study these kinds of problems as well. So we can look at food security issues as well. So you can imagine that by studying this problem, we have been enabled to go on to study other complicated migration patterns for other insects. Okay. So finally, I want to tell you about another interesting bird. It's called the Amur falcon. It comes from the river Amur, which is over there, which is the China-Russia border, and it comes all the way through China and enters India through Nagaland, and thereafter it goes all the way to South Africa, and the red line you see is exactly the satellite data. And you can see there is some amount of overlap with that of dragonflies. So they are feeding on these dragonflies, and that's, you can see now there is ecology at different hierarchical levels. So the dragonflies are migrating, they are being fed upon these Amur falcons. So if, for instance, due to changing climate patterns, the migration of dragonflies is affected. For instance, Maldives is getting sort of submerged underwater, etc. So that can go on to affect the dragonfly migration, and that can affect the migration of other birds. So it's very complicated, and it can have far-reaching consequences. So you can imagine how important for us it is to understand these phenomena. Okay. So I want to leave you with these thoughts. Globe skimmers establish a crucial ecological highway. So actually it's a highway, you know, they're connected. Okay, between India and Africa, sustaining ecological balance of both continents. Okay, minor size, major journey. That's sort of the message. The main message. These insects cross the Indian Ocean by masterfully tapping into seasonal winds along a near optimal trajectory. So that's the hypothesis, that there is an optimal trajectory, and they're probably taking a near optimal trajectory. And finally, decoding the globe skimmer is redefining how we study massive insect movements like the transatlantic flight of painted ladies and desert locusts, and underscores the urgency of protecting transoceanic migrations in an era of climate change. Okay. With that, thank you very much. So, yeah,
Yeah,
I'll take questions.
Yeah, thank you, Professor.
Very interesting. It was like we were transgressing all these rules. We were taken. Simultaneously, they have to take the optimal wind support, optimal. So they have to decide the direction also. How they simultaneously decide direction?
Okay. There are different sort of aspects to this question itself. Okay. One is that the dragonfly is not migrating at the surface level. So if it is feeding, eating on the on the surface, it will not know what's going on at 1,000 meters. So there's a meteorological aspect. So how do they know what altitude they have to go to check? Okay. Now, even if they reach that level, then how do they detect these winds? I mean, what biological features do they have to detect these things? So I have one slide. I had expected this question. So okay. So you can imagine that they can soar with the rising thermals. Okay, so they can go to certain heights, check what's the condition like. Okay, probably they can measure moisture gradients. Probably they can measure wind gradients. I mean, what they can actually do, we don't know very well. But this is a very recent paper in 2024. So this is a cross section of the dragonfly's wing. So you can see this is the cutout section. So you can see that black dotted line. That black dashed line is what the researchers they took, and they put it under a microscope. This is an SEM, okay, scanning electron microscope, and they were looking at the structure of the dragonfly. So you can see there's venation on the dragonfly's wings, okay, and in that venation you can see these patterns. So these are the veins, okay, you can see the veins, and on those veins you have these tiny dots. Can you see those tiny dots? Those tiny dots actually look like that. So it's a bump and a bristle complex. Okay? That's the bump and the bristle. So you can imagine this is trying to answer your question. I mean, I don't know what's exactly going on, but this is my guess. That if you have a bump like this, now you can have air coming from this direction, this direction, this direction, this direction. You will feel the pressure in different parts. So with that, you can possibly tell which direction the wind is coming from. And with that, if you go take measurements as a dragonfly at different locations and put all this data together and you do some artificial intelligence in your brain, you can tell whether it is a good day to migrate or not, and those kinds of decisions can be made.
Thank you. One more question.
Yeah.
The aerodynamic equilibrium, the drag, lift, all those four, has it been worked out? So much it is traversing.
Okay, that's a good question. So we make certain assumptions in applying that model. I mean, there's a fundamental difference between a Boeing 737 and the Dragonfly. The Dragonfly doesn't have an engine separately. So the wings are the propellers and the lifting thing. Okay, so you cannot apply it directly, but you make certain assumptions to apply that. And under certain assumptions, when we apply, we can work out how it works out for the jumbo jet. We apply the same ideas under certain assumptions and we work out. And it's been applied to birds as well. And it seems to work. Okay, that's, if you want, I can go deeper, but I don't know how much deeper.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay.
Hello, sir. Good evening. So you spoke about different bands of these globe skimmers while migrating. It's not that it's one entire group of dragons. So do we know why is there such inconsistency? Why some bands choose to travel at a different time, although in the same months? But why is there inconsistency there?
No, it's not inconsistency. It's we haven't studied these kinds of problems enough to make an intelligent guess. But what I know, or from my little knowledge of these things, is that how is that swarm going to form initially? Okay, so a few guys, they start flying in one direction, and then the other guys are watching them, and then they start following them, and then so you've got a leader and a follower. Okay, and there's something about the dynamics of these which governs as to how far you can see, how far you react. I mean, if the guy is really far away, you don't care perhaps, but if the guy is very close, then so it's something related to the dynamics. So the swarms, they would form, and then once the swarm is formed, then they migrate together. So I think it depends on how far that information can flow, and then you know that, okay, this is a sustainable swarm, and anything larger than this, it might just start breaking up and going in different directions. Things like that might be happening. Yeah.
Thank you so much. That was very fascinating.
Thank you.
How do they know? Is there something that allows them to sense that there is land? Because, like you said, that if they had gone straight to the tail, they would have not been, they didn't have enough, they couldn't have gone more than those 90 hours. So over time, how do they know
The
that
navigation.
Yeah, the navigation.
Yeah, we don't know.
We
don't know. I mean, what we know is that, so for instance, birds have compass, and insects have been also known to have compass. Okay? Magnetic field they can detect. But precisely for this animal, it's hard to persuade a biologist to work on dragonflies. It's not a rewarding career if you're working on dragonflies. It's more rewarding to work on a fruit fly or something because you can get a paper out. So we don't know, but they have something. Yeah. Somebody should pick up that topic at work, actually. So all the young people, I think you should work with dragonflies.
So before asking my question, a follow-up on this. Is there any animal on which we have done like considerable research? We know
Butterflies.
Butterflies. Okay,
Butterflies.
check it.
Monarch butterflies.
So my question was that, like you mentioned, that we can't put trackers on lightweight animals like this. So how do we know the path, and how, like, over how many years was this path constructed? Is it like same for-
Okay. So it's a little bit like astrophysics. You get information from multiple channels, and you put all of them together to make sense.
But we need to be sure that they are the same group of things doing it. That is one, and second.
So year after year, we get this kind of information that.
So over how long was this data collected?
Over 100 years to have information. Like I was showing the papers, they were from 1913. So 1913 to recent days, we have papers which are saying the same thing.
So is it like people are just observing that?
Yeah,
they
at the same time of the year.
arrive
Yeah.
in this place.
Yeah.
All right. So just arrival kind of weird.
Yeah. So over a period of 100 years, so it is irrefutable.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for the talk, sir. My question is, the way we have formation flights in birds, is that effect also prevalent in insects? Because I would imagine they're smaller, so wind would probably be much more effective.
It's a very good question, and I have been wanting to work on this, but I haven't worked on it yet. We don't even know yet whether, the insects are able to take advantage in the way birds take advantage. Okay, it might be very different. So it might be more like, when cyclists are, cycling. So they form a group, and then the guy in the center, he conserves his energy until the last dash, and he goes for that. So it might be something like that. They might be sort of the ones on the edges of the swarm, they are actively expending more energy, and they come inwards, and the ones which are sort of inwards, they move out. So things like that might be happening, but you saw the video, they are very far off. So we don't know if the aerodynamic interactions are significant or to what extent they are affecting the many things, so to speak. And on top of that, you've got the wind. So you've got wind, you've got turbulence, you've got aerodynamic interactions. It's a very hard problem.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Hello, sir. I wanted to know that when there are strong crosswinds, not in the direction of their path, so how do they conquer that?
So
Because
they will be drifting.
they will be drifting,
They will
right?
definitely be
But
drifting.
do
It
they?
depends how strong is the wind and how sort of great, strong is the angle, the large is the angle in which they have to go. So I suppose they break off. They have some mechanism to break off before it gets too hard.
Okay. Okay.
So you remember when I was explaining that slide, there was the preferred inherited direction, and they're also sort of probably calculating the drift. So if your drift and your PID are very, very different, then they will want to start breaking away, something like that.
So I have a question, sir.
Yeah, yeah.
First of all, thank you very much for a wonderful talk. It was very, very interesting. I had a very simple question. So what if we have a group of these insects within the wind tunnel so that can we study how they actually behave in a group?
Yeah. I mean, if I get another good PhD student like I will definitely want to do that. There are certain sort of caveats to that sort of analysis. I mean, we did the experiment in our 45 by 45 tunnel. And you saw that, in the video, it was pushing the air quite far away. So how far the walls are is going to have an impact. Now you can put a bunch and that becomes more complex. So you need to do those experiments in a much larger wind tunnel. And to have all of them tethered is going to create other kinds of problems. And to not have them tethered is going to create other sorts of problems. So it's inherently a very hard problem.
And
it's very hard to work with live insects.
within the wind tunnel, what is their motivation to move in a particular direction?
No, they're tethered. So they just mounted. So these are tethered.
Okay.
We can aim at doing free flight experiments, but people have done with bats, birds, but insects, they have done other odometry experiments. It is possible. It's just we have not achieved. It's not easy because the dragonflies are very smart, very fast. So you just don't know where to focus. So they would go past even before you've taken a picture. There are other problems. I mean, the dragonfly is very sort of intelligent animal. They can figure out, there's a wall around them and they might not behave in the normal way. So there are many challenges. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. It was very good. One quick question. So we know about where it starts and where it ends. The source and destination we know from whatever the papers that wherever we got it. Do we have any intelligence around what altitude it travels?
Yeah.
Where this migration happens?
So there are papers which say that this is the height. And the way to verify that, people have worked on it, is that you run simulations at different altitudes and then you'll find that some altitude is favorable. So it is very likely that they are picking the favorable altitude.
Do you have any numbers that where
1,000 meters. 1,000
over
meters.
and above 1,000 meters?
Yeah, around 1,000 meters, maybe more, maybe less, around that. Yeah.
Hi, thanks for the talk. My question is that with this mode of flight with 4 wings, is there, and you said that there is a ratio of range of distance covered to the weight, that dragonflies are the most in that 360 million something. So
yes, that's the 18,000 kilometers divided by 5 centimeters. Yes.
So can some inspired from that, is there anything in actual flights we can use and derive something from it? Like make aircrafts which can carry farther distances? Or
I mean,
just
people have
generally
made dragonfly kind of biomimetics, so people have made those things, but much larger scale. I mean, if the kind of bionics, there's a group in Germany which made this kind of dragonfly. It's almost like a bird, actually. So the hard part is when you start reducing the size, then we don't have the kind of electronics which is required. So a battery which can power, so carrying the fuel, and which is the battery in this case, and making it so small and lightweight that it can fly very easily. But I've seen on LinkedIn that the Chinese have made something like a mosquito or something. I mean, I don't know what's the truth. This is all you're sort of encroaching on the sort of defense sector sort of thing. So, I mean, I don't really know which countries made what, but it's certainly hard. I mean, if you see most of the videos which you'll see is that you'll find a fine sort of metal wire which is connecting to these tiny robots, and that's what is powering them usually. And to have something which is like autonomous, which is untethered, is hard.
So for a small size, then four-wing design is more suitable, do you think?
Oh, well, I mean, the thing is that the question is, what are you trying to achieve? I mean, this guy is super capable, it can generate large forces when required, it can cruise efficiently. So if you want to design a capable system which has got a lot of redundancy, reliability, then this is the way to go. But if you want something just for one specific purpose, then maybe another design. So it really depends, I mean, what you're trying to achieve. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Is it possible that you can follow the swarm?
Oh, yes. Yes and no. I mean, it's not easy. The reason is, so what people have done is with larger insects, they have tried to follow them, hawk moths. So, for instance, the Swiss, they have a lot of money and they could fund such a study. So they flew in an aircraft and they followed such a swarm for 100, 150 kilometers over the Swiss Alps. And they pretty much go in straight lines. A lot of it is straight lines. So they know where they're heading and they don't go with the wind. They pretty much sort of go with the sort of direction they want to go. Okay, they're compensating for the wind. But the hard part is you have to be ready with your aircraft, and you get the information and you start chasing them. So you have to have a spotter ready, and the spotter tells the nearest aircraft, nearest airport, and you jump into your Cessna and then you take off and then you're following them. It's not easy. It's a lot of you have to have your aircraft on standby, ready, and who's going to pay for it. So yeah. Not to my knowledge, but if it is possible, then that would be great. But current drones, fixed wing drones might be developed for that purpose. We would like to develop those. As it?
The time from destination 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 again come back. It says 6 generations.
There's a window. If you are outside the window, it will not be possible. So if you want to go from India to Maldives, for example, there's the window, September, October, November, December maybe. So if you're not making it in that window, then the subsequent leg, you might still be able to go to Maldives in another time. Maybe in February, March you can go, but you will miss the next leg, or you'll miss your next flight, so to speak. So it's like that. So if you don't make it in time, you miss your next flight, and then the whole cycle is going to be disrupted.
So do we have a timeline for the whole cycle?
Yeah. So they have a lifespan about 3 to 4 months, and which is why they can make it around in 4 generations. Yeah.
We'll wind up the question and answer session with the last question, Professor. We'll wind up the question and answer session.
Okay.
So after that, I mean, you can all have coffee and discuss over coffee. So.
Hi, sir. I'm Sai. I'm working in aquarics. So
you're working in
aquarics.
Aquarius.
Yes, it is amphibious drone.
Oh, okay.
Company.
Okay.
So we are also building amphibious drones. Like it can fly and go underwater. So I have a question. Like after doing this research, what are the applications, like ideas you got from this? Like I got.
I should have talked about it, but I think I ran out of time.
Like,
I mean, it has had a huge impact on my group. I mean, so first is that, we've got PhDs coming out. 3 PhDs came out of it. So we are doing those simulations I was talking about, right? So there are different ways of looking at it. One is, the scientific value it brought. Okay, and I was trying to tell you the scientific value, the ecological significance, the new questions which have come up, and it has enabled us to go on to pursue other hard questions which were sort of not possible earlier. So that's the scientific value. You might say, well, okay, fine, that's good for the science, but what as public, how do we benefit? So we are learning about the aerodynamics of these dragonflies. I was telling you about the forewing, hindwing, this kind of motion, this kind of motion. So this was not obvious earlier. Now we know that, okay, if you design a system like this, then you can make it very capable in terms of it can generate large forces, it can accelerate, it can cruise, it can. So this knowledge we have to translate into some engineering product. So that's yet to happen, but we learn from the dragonflies that this is the way to fly. So there are other things, I mean, their navigation mechanism, if we learn, then maybe those things can come into picture. So, but to me, the most sort of amazing thing is that it's such a tiny, I mean, our brain's big, so big. And we still struggle to, if you tell me to do the PID, how I'm drifting with the wind, if I have to do, I need piece of pen, paper, and then I can do the calculations. It's doing on the fly. It's flying, it's making decisions, it's doing all of that inside that tiny head. I don't know how it does that. So, I mean, there's this huge amount of stuff which we can still learn. But to simple answers can be like, you can have those corrugated patterns and you can build on those and you can sort of, but that's only useful if you're flying at those Reynolds numbers. That's much lower Reynolds numbers than typical industrial applications. So the Boeing 737 is going at a much higher Reynolds number. So you will not benefit for the Boeing 737, but if you're making something which is off the scale of the Dragonfly or small microaerial vehicles, then you can learn from those ideas and you can implement on those. I have some papers I can show you how we can take it towards, like product like ideas. Yeah. Okay.
I got to it. For one single wing, use multiple aerofoils. Like I am not from aerospace background. I am from electronics background.
Yeah.
So while seeing in the company, like from that knowledge, after seeing this, I got two ideas. One, use multiple aerofoils for one single wing.
Okay.
Can we do that? Can we get?
I mean, the Dragonfly does have a three-dimensional variation. So there is one airfoil near the root, and then as you move away, then it changes. The Venetian pattern sort of tells us what kind of airfoil you have at different cross sections. So they do have it. Yes. I mean, we should study that more. And I mean, but the thing is that you also have the forewing and the hindwing. Okay, so there's a gap between them. So that starts to affect I mean, I was showing those simulations, right? So forewing, so there's plenty of complexity. So plenty of ideas we can take and try, and something works. So we can make products out of that. Why not?
Yeah. One more idea I got is like while flying, if we have more speed, like different aerofoils will useful. Like they will be having pros and cons. At one situation, one aerofoil will be good. In another situation, another aerofoil will be good. So we have to design such a way that if in that case this aerofoil should be something. In another case, it should be.
Oh, you mean a morphing airfoil?
Like it should change based on the
so the Dragonfly's wings are actually flexible, so they can change the. By modifying. So when it's flexing the wings, I mean, I didn't show so much in detail, but the passive flight I was talking about, the burst and the passive. So there it can flex the wings and it can change the camber. Yeah. So, but we can't make those wings. It's very hard to make those wings.
Yeah.
Even with 3D printing, etc. It's not easy. Sorry. Yeah. And then you have to worry about actuating it.
Building small actuators, we had to build like LEDs.
Yeah. But it's fascinating. Yeah. You can spend your lifetime studying this. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. So the rest of the questions you can discuss over coffee that is being served outside. There is also a QR code for you to give the feedback about the event. So please, if you can, do that also. So thanks a lot, everyone, for joining. Thanks a lot, Professor.
Okay. Thank you.
honestly.